Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Protiviti and Robert Half Collaboration Forum. My name is Paul Middleton, and I'm joined here today by my colleagues from Protiviti and our sister company, Robert Half. This is our weekly collaboration forum, and this is week 2 of our new series, a 5th and final series that will take us to the end of English lockdown on June 21st, well, we hope. And it's great to see you all here and to see some familiar faces and some new faces alike. Since March of last year, our weekly forum has been aiming to invigorate, challenge and inspire us all to be bold, to look beyond our computer screens, to stand up and think differently, as well as to bring optimism in a time that has been for so many one of disruption, uncertainty and often change. Over the months, our forum has become a place for today's business leaders and our leaders of tomorrow to talk to each other, learn from each other, challenge each other, and gain confidence from each other's perspectives and experiences. And that aim is the same today as it's always been. This is your forum. It's not a closed forum. You're not muted. It's pretty informal. And I urge you to get involved, make your voice heard and share your opinion and get the most from it you can. A thread that's run through all of our forums is that now is the time to think differently and to be actioning both big and small ideas. Put differently, we believe at Protiviti and Robert Half that if we don't proactively drive change during this continued period of disruption, we run the risk of rapidly becoming irrelevant and falling behind the pack. But there's another danger now, a danger that's quietly lurking for all of us, a tipping point that we are rapidly approaching as we begin to unlock and spend more time face to face with our colleagues, move out of our home offices and think about dusting off our office desks. And that danger is that we sleepwalk back into our old working habits and we leave behind our COVID mindset, a mindset that's given us all a newfound ability to drive change at a rate we previously thought impossible, to achieve things we were told could not be done, and to suddenly overcome barriers that had previously seemed unscalable. In other words, over the last 13 months, we've successfully broken an office-based 9-to-5 working pattern that's been with us since the Industrial Revolution. And our challenge to all of you in this forum is not to march backwards and fall into those old habits and lose everything we've achieved. Because if we do, we can be sure that others won't and will simply fall behind. Instead, let's be bold and imagine what the future can be and how we can grasp it. And that's exactly what we're going to do over the coming weeks on this forum. And we're doing that by looking at the future of work, the future of social justice, future of ESG, healthcare, retail, entertainment, and many more topics, and digging into how you can shape that future to build on what we've achieved so far. And today, we're doing exactly that and looking at the future of culture. With the scale and pace of change that's occurring, our culture can often come under strain. Your workplace has changed, your colleagues have changed, you have changed, and the expectations of all of us have changed over the last 12 months. If we don't manage and recalibrate our workplace culture, we risk losing our corporate identities, and that will have a huge knock-on effect on our people. So today, we're going to unpack the future of culture and look at how your workplace culture needs to evolve so that you and your businesses will thrive going forward. We'll cover what the right culture might look like, the impacts of hybrid office strategies, shifting client demand, evolving workplace expectations, and many other topics. And to do that, I'm delighted to say that we're joined here today by 3 culture gurus to inspire, challenge and guide our discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Karen Jones, who is Managing Director of Denison Consulting for the UK, Ireland and Nordics. Denison's mission is to boost the performance of organisations by improving their corporate culture and leadership. And Karen says that her goal is to transform the ambiguous and unmanageable within organisations into something energising and productive. Karen and her team work with clients to develop a high-performance culture in which employees can achieve exceptional results. And she's been with Denison for over 6 years, having spent a career looking at organisational development, corporate improvement and emotional intelligence. And we're delighted to have her with us today. Next, I'd like to introduce Stephen Buck, who is Head of People Science for Glint. Stephen spent the last 20 years helping people become happier and more successful at work, and the last 4 of these being at Glint. Glint, as many of you will know, is a people success platform that uses people data to work with organisations in order to increase employee engagement, develop their people and improve business results. In his people science role at Glint, Stephen focuses on everything from cultural nuances in the ways people and organisations work to data privacy. And we're delighted to have him with us today. And next, I'm pleased to introduce Dan Sodergren. Dan is co-founder of YourFlock, a tech startup and personal development tool to help managers and bosses increase working from home happiness, retain key talent, and increase team productivity. Dan is a self-confessed lover of tech and a futurist, as well as leads the diversity and inclusion agenda across Manchester's media, digital and creative industry. His philosophy, which I'm sure he'll tell us more about, balances the importance of company culture in a world where digital transformation underpins the next business revolution. As a futurist, he's worked with and appeared on the BBC, Channel 4, and various local and national stations, as well as numerous podcasts and webinars. And again, delighted that Dan has taken the time to join us today. So an amazing lineup. And as normal, I'll kick things off with a few questions to our panelists, but please add your thoughts in the chat, stick up your hand and I'll come to you, or just if you can't contain yourself, just shout out. But whatever you do, please do get involved. So Stephen, if I may start with you, drawing on your experiences, Stephen, from the companies that you and your colleagues at Glint work with, what have been the most significant corporate culture changes over the last 12 months? And what challenges do you think this presents to organisations?
I think I could reel off a long line of platitudes around, new normal, unprecedented, the stuff that you've all been reading for the last 18 months. But I think the most noticeable thing for me, which is still underway, is that organisations have had to learn to work with different types of connections. So that's obvious in terms of physical presence in the office, as you referred to earlier on, Paul. But I'm talking about that sort of different sense of belonging, different sense of psychological engagement with the organisation, with the job, with the future, and with one's surroundings. So what that has caused is that managers and organisations which historically have felt quite comfortable and quite rigid with managing people by numbers, by objectives, by KPIs, feel increasingly uncomfortable doing some of the things we'll talk about today around helping people feel that sense of belonging, feel that they can bring their best selves to work, feel that they're included, feel that they're supported. In other words, managing the person rather than the person as a commodity or a number or an objective. So what's happened culturally is that this has meant that HR as an organisation, which has historically been probably at the table, but maybe at the periphery of the table, asking for better technology, asking for better insights about people in organisations, have now been thrust to the forefront of the boardroom, have been thrust through the forefront of what's essential in an organisation. So that's been a real shift for me, and a positive one, because it's not, from my side, I work a lot with HR people. They've historically had to deal with some pretty crummy technology, whereas people in sales and finance have had all the kind of singing and dancing tech. So I've been really encouraged by the increasingly important role that HR has had, which is enabling a lot of those things that I talked to you before about. On a personal level, I don't feel guilty about carving out time for myself anymore. So that was something that I've learned culturally for the last 18 months, that my organisation has always been very supportive. Tech companies generally they do look after their people, but I've always felt guilty about it. So giving myself the bandwidth and actually taking my organisation up and feeling that psychological space and safety to do so. So that's been I just want to reflect on an organisational and a personal one.
No, thank you, Stephen. That's great. Karen, if I may just ask you for your opening remarks, and particularly, already, and thank you for the comments that are coming through in the chat. Stephen's talked there about the kind of the psychological engagement, and also people are reflecting on whether there's now a risk of COVID inertia as we look to go back to the office. What have you seen those changes be over the last 12 months, and what challenges does that present? Oh, sorry, Karen, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Super, thank you.
Great. I think we have to say that the companies that continued to do their organisational culture diagnostic with us, in 2020, we were quite surprised to see the strength of their results. We kind of concluded that these were companies that already realised the importance of assessing your culture, managing it, discussing it. So their scores were much stronger than we'd anticipated, and what came out as kind of 5 strong themes with what they were doing well was, they were really focusing on coordinating and that cooperation piece, in a flexible way. They'd shifted, the priorities had often shifted, so they pivoted really well to the short term, and really managed to get a balance between both the short term and the longer term priorities, accepting that the longer term priorities were far less clear because the context was unpredictable. They'd also focused, as they focused more on survival, there was a kind of a bit of a shift in core values and capability development, but doing that assessment reminded them that they had to go back and keep that connection. There was some concern about keeping in close contact with customers, but also not only external customers, but as internal customers with their colleagues. But the biggest improvements that they managed to make was around communication. So keeping people informed amidst that uncertainty. Empowerment, we saw increases in empowerment. People were really kind of involved and informed and enabled to make decisions because there was, people were at a distance, and so that kind of delegation of authority happened. And I think people realized that that was a powerful shift and a useful shift. And bouncing forward, there was a lot of focus on how to build in the learning. So our statement about new and improved ways of working, people were really getting to grips with that organisational learning piece. How do we do that reflection? How do we bring back the best practice to those that may be struggling most? And I think for me, my personal learning, I did an outdoor intelligence course and thought about nature. And how do we take time? Stephen, I did struggle. I did get out from my bedroom, go into my office and stay there for 10 hours. And I suddenly thought, why am I doing that? And just took an outdoor intelligence course and encouraged some of my coachees to go outside and see what they could learn from nature. So that's been absolutely fantastic and a really nice personal learning about I have choice. I don't have to do all of my hours in one. I can spend some time in the afternoon while the sun's shining and then come and work maybe later in the evening if that's what I want to do. So that's the glory of being able to have a choice, but not everybody on the front line has that choice too, and we have to remember that.
Thank you, Karen. Dan, just to you for some opening remarks. I'm sure you'll want to reflect on Stephen's comment around some of the pretty crummy technology that HR has been grappling with for years. But just to someone who's kind of bringing disruption to this space, just what do you see as some of those changes over the last 12 months?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love the fact that that HR has finally got HR technology, and we have much better systems in place. And of course, your Flock is one of those pieces of technology. We are just a tiny part of your potential tech stack that you're going to need in the future. If you're going to be a post-pandemic modern manager, you're going to need this stuff, just like modern salespeople, modern digital marketeers need it. You're going to need multiple tools to use. Anyway, what our tool does is it looks at the core values of your company. You have 9 different potentials, and it looks and it picks out a core value from an en masse culture map that it creates. So what we're finding from without getting too techy and giving away too much of the data game, so to speak, is we've actually found that caring has gone up. That's one of the values that we've ascertained. Caring seems to have gone up, and a couple of other ones. Autonomy has gone up as well, and adaptability has gone up as people are taking these surveys, and the teams have got bigger that are using your Flock as well. So we're in stealth mode at the moment, so you can't actually sign up, and you can go and sign up to our waiting list, and I invite you to do so. But at the moment, because we're doing stuff with machine learning, we're looking at those data points, so you can't actually go and use it yourselves. One of the things that I find fascinating, it's a data point which I still can't kind of come to terms with, but maybe the other people on the call, and I'm great fans of both of your companies, will know, is that teamwork is going down as a core value, and bizarrely enough, so's being detail driven is also going down. So we're finding a few things that have happened that we can't necessarily put our fingers on, but it's a fascinating time from a personal point of view. Yeah, I'm echoing again what Karen's saying about being flexible, getting out there and doing different stuff and getting into nature and other things. I've got a 10-year-old daughter, so I found that that my belief that I'm a great teacher is simply not true. My homeschooling was terrible, completely against Ofsted in every single way possible, I think. And the other one that I found is I find that meditation and other things have been really helpful for me personally, because it gives you that time to pause. And as you know, Paul and other people on the call, I get paid to talk quite a lot, so I don't always pause. So it's sometimes nice to be able to do that in this moment of COVID.
Absolutely. And look, all three of you, thank you so much. You've covered like so many different themes there, and we'll come to those in a minute, from caring, autonomy, adaptability, teamwork. But Karen, if I could just come to you for a second, because with all these themes, and you're all in kind of agreement that the world has shifted over the last 12 months. As we return to office in greater numbers, companies need to start looking at this and addressing this, and the people on this call need to start looking at this seriously and saying, well, what do we do about it? But how should people begin to understand where they are now and what their own particular challenges are?
Well, I suppose my answer with that, is how do we create the honest conversations? And I always think frameworks help. I think we use the word culture a lot, and it's often a term that is intangible for lots of people and for senior leaders too. So, I think, when we were preparing for this session, one question was, do we need to reframe culture? I suppose my first question was, have we framed it? What do we mean when we talk about culture? I mean, before I found the Denison model, that was a difficult question for me to answer. So, I think if we're going to start having those honest conversations, diagnostic helps, but let's not diagnose anything unless we're going to treat it. So, I think sometimes diagnostic is painful, it's exposing. And I think, the leaders who have been really brave say, OK, let's define current state, because, we all want to change things, but sometimes we're too impatient to know where we start from and where we need to go. So I would be really clear to say, you can diagnose your current state. There's lots of ways of doing that. Find a way that resonates for you. I particularly like the Denison because it links to performance, and it's an evidence-based model that says, what is it about our organizational culture that we know will drive our performance? And it also talks about managing the tensions. Have a strategy, but make sure your people know what that strategy means for them. They've been included, they own it, they have a sense of responsibility. So, I think find out where you are, find a framework that helps you have a structured conversation, because otherwise it can become so nebulous, you don't end up with the so what.
Dan, do you see that as well? Do you agree with Karen's kind of need for a framework to assess where we are now?
Yeah, sorry, I was just nodding away there, because I think it's absolutely right. This is the thing, isn't it? We've got to have a benchmark and a way of understanding. As you say, culture can be just so. We have the curse of knowledge, of course, as people that work in this kind of, so we think that everyone else will get all this stuff. But actually, if you can't benchmark quite precisely where you are right now, you have a massive danger of just going, oh, our culture's good. And actually, most of the time, people who say that their culture's good, it isn't, by the way. It's just that them and their friends like running the company. But that doesn't mean your company culture's good. It means that maybe your leadership team has a great culture and you're very aligned, but actually the rest of your teams might not be, because you've never really asked them. And in fact, when the times you ask them without being too silly about it, it's usually over a gunpoint. It's not exactly a psychologically safe moment. It's like, do you like working here? Yes, of course we do. Let's all vote and get an award. Well, it doesn't mean that they do. So, big things happening in COVID right now. Well, not right now, but, and again, we've got to be careful with stats and things. But it's about, in America, it's around 51%, they're saying, that of people that are looking for a new job. Yeah. And that is terrifying. It should be terrifying for a lot of people on the call. I'm not saying it's as high in England. It was about 19% a few years ago. I think it's around 40% now. And if you're not looking at your culture and seeing how your teams align and seeing how you're going to keep your people together, working together, I think, I'm totally with Karen. You've got to get your benchmark and make sure, even if it might be a painful or you might feel it's an unnecessary conversation, actually it's the most important conversation you can have.
Yeah. And Stephen, and I know all three of you are data rich in the sense that you work with data and people data. But Stephen, just reflecting on a comment from Justin as well, do you see those same trends, and do you think there's that difference between how employees are feeling before the pandemic and after? And do you have kind of data around that to give us more insight?
We do, and unfortunately I've got the chat switched off because I get very easily distracted, so I didn't see Justin's comment. But in terms of what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, the first thing was that people, a lot of organizations kind of went into a little bit of a panic mode. They thought, is now the right time to be asking our employees what they think about their job when we're making people redundant or putting them on furlough or sending them home for the first time? And I'll be honest with you, I was quite afraid from a perspective of an organization that asks employees what they think. I was a bit worried about my future for a moment. And something then quite positive happened. I'm not sure it's because of the clients that we're working with who are a little bit more in tune with this type of thing, but people continued to ask their employees what they were thinking. And they started being a lot more agile in the content. So, we're advocates of fairly regular listening, even if it's a short number of questions. But it enabled us then to say, let's keep asking employees what they think about their engagement, about their growth, about their future, the classic signals of success. But let's be flexible in terms of what do they need today? What do they need this month? What do they need this week even? And because that, for the first time, was changing much more rapidly than we'd ever seen before. So in the early stages, we know that people wanted to feel much more supported in terms of infrastructure, in terms of their computer, their broadband, their office, if they're indeed working from home. If they didn't go home, if they're in manufacturing or frontline workers, what physical measures were being taken by their organizations to keep them safe and keep them distant and keep them away from this, this what now became an evil public who were making them sick. And then we moved into more, I guess, and I hate using the word softer things, but in many cases they were. These elements around how can I help you today? Or how are you feeling today? How can I help you prioritize your work? And I know today's about culture, and this really was a cultural shift to my earlier point, that managers historically have been told to avoid talking about people's personal lives. And with quite good reason, that it's, there's you can't ask somebody about their family because it may become a diversity issue. You can't ask about certain things because it may be offensive, or whatever it might be. So we suddenly saw that managers had to ask people how they were doing. How, do you have kids? Are you looking after kids? As in recruitment, you don't ask people if they have kids. It's not allowed. So all of these types of things became a cultural shift, that it became very, very relevant for employees' day-to-day operations and success to be able to interact with their leaders, interact with their peers, people that they were collaborating with on some of these personal topics. And that's where we saw this real uptick in organizations. And actually, in the pandemic, we saw a doubling of our clients running surveys, whether they be short or long surveys. It's moved, and I'll talk about these later, so to give other people the floor, but it's moved a lot more since those early days in the pandemic into what I would characterize as more future-focused opportunities. So looking at the state of the business, looking at how I'm empowered, looking at my learning and growth for the future, rather than just the sort of panic, what do I need now?
Thank you, Stephen. And some great perspectives so far. Thank you all for the chat coming through. It's really good to see. Look out, all three panelists, you're all warmed up now, so it's time for the first difficult question. And Rupert's been kind enough to post that. How do humans flourish in organisations? You're all going to keep this mute button on there at the minute, aren't you? It's any quick thoughts on that? Just because I guess it's a useful baselining question, but how do we as humans, what do we need to flourish in organisations? Any perspective on that?
I'll jump in mainly because you thought that people wouldn't, so I'm just going to defy convention slightly by doing so. No, so how do human beings flourish? This is the proposition. This is the value proposition, really, of what Your Flock does. It looks at the things that are underneath what we might call company culture. The silly things on the brand walls, and the fact you've got a foosball table and you think that no one ever uses, and beanbags, which inherently non-diverse, by the way, to have beanbags. Anyway, it doesn't mean you're a cool tech company if you have beanbags. So all this stuff to make human beings flourish, you've got to tap into the deeper values of that person. Of course, we can talk about mastery and autonomy and purpose, but we all know if you can link into the values and you can become purpose-led as a team, you are 300% more productive. If you can bring in diversity, you make actually happier places and more innovative places, which is why I'm always banging the drum about diversity. Not just because I think it makes the world a better place, but actually it makes better companies and it actually makes more money. And there's huge amounts of research around that. So how do you make human beings flourish? Well, you allow them the psychological safety and the space that Steve's talking about. You do the pauses and then linking back to nature that Karen's talking about, but you also investigate what makes them tick by asking them the right questions. But you need a piece of technology, because en masse, you can't do that without technology. You can't do this without technology. It's like you can't be a great salesperson without CRM and without intelligence. It's the same thing now, which of course is why the HR tech world is booming. And I'll give you a slight cliche, which is I think we've got to bring the humane back into human resources. That's what we've got to do. And ironically, we can do that with technology. But it just means that humans can become better and help each other flourish more. Hopefully that's given people a couple of few seconds to prime their answers too.
Karen?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in there too. And that's what I do. That's why I do what I do. We're at work more than we're anywhere else. So we should turn up at our best and be recognised for that. And I think for me, on our definition of high performance culture, it starts with a compelling vision. Now, that compelling vision isn't purely about profit, that not everybody gets a bonus related to, but it's about purpose. What difference are we trying to make? It connects back to core values on our model, and it connects back to being customer focused and the teams we work for and the goals and objectives we have and how we're going to handle conflict and disagreement, because that vision is important enough to deal with that. So for me, I think I flourish when I'm at work, when I can be who I can be. I was a bit horrified, Stephen, when you said, HR people can't talk about personal stuff. Now, for me, there's the doing and then there's the being. And the being is as important as what we're trying to do. So how do we have an appropriate conversation that does show people that I care about you as a human being, trying to do what it is we have to do to drive this purpose forward? So I think flourishing, I don't want to work in a company that doesn't allow me to flourish, or certainly allow me to challenge whether I could. Now, let me challenge it. If I decide I can't, I'm going to leave, because that it's important to me. I want to have purpose and I want to make a difference when I come to work. And I don't think we should be fearful of that. And if we're too afraid to have a conversation that goes down there, then I think something's wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, Karen. Now, I'd like just to then, you all started talking about in the first question, so many themes about what the future of culture looked like. And Stephen, if I can maybe come to you with one of those, which is almost the flip side of what Karen was just talking about, which is, the opposite of flourishing is we've seen a lot of people over the course of the last year burning out. And, as we dig into what those cultural imperatives and themes are going to be for successful companies to navigate going forward, how do they navigate the risk of burnout amongst their employees? Yeah,
and there's something that Karen said a minute ago, which I liked, because it was talking about, if you're not aligning your culture to a vision or a strategy, then you can't keep people focused on a common goal. So there's no point having a set of aspirations if they just feel like marketing speak. They have to relate to people. They have to be human. But if we think about the burnout side of things, then we've definitely seen a huge increase, and it continues, by the way, increase in burnout signal. And so that we're all clear, we're not asking people, are you stressed? Are you burnt out? Because people will naturally give the same type of response as saying, do I have high workload, and do we have enough resources? You need to be a bit more subtle about it. So like with measuring culture, you need to tap into the underlying behaviors that sit around that, because you can measure those more accurately. So when we look at the signal, we're actually looking at verbatim comments. So we're looking at not just what people are saying in terms of crossing a box from 1 to 5, agree, strongly agree. We're actually looking at the way people describe their comments and the verbatims. So that might be using words like anxiety or stress or pressure or worry, or any of these types of things that people naturally talk about when in comments rather than the other side of things. So we've seen a massive increase in burnouts. It's climbing up to about 5.5 8% of comments that we're receiving at the moment, and that was just to set the ideas. This was around 4% at the beginning of the pandemic. So people naturally talk about burnout anyway, but it's continuing to climb. So we looked at the root causes of burnouts, and we said, yes, it's alarming. We know that it's improved 4% over the last quarter. And we know that people are talking about some of the more classic signs of burnout and anxiety, things like workload, things like conflict between home and work demands, things about the sort of little support from managers and that sort of thing. But what we found, number one, in terms of driving signals of burnout, was feeling that sense of disconnection from colleagues. And this, I think Dan referred to this idea of teamwork declining. That's probably what he said. It was a bit of a mystery, but I think that's what's at the heart of it. People feeling disconnected from what they're normally hardwired to feel as human beings, which is a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and a sense of connection. We also know that unclear job responsibilities plays a huge role. People not knowing how to prioritize their work when they've got 1,000,001 other things going on outside work. And then finally, it was around recognition for good work. Do I feel that, when my managers are telling me to work longer, faster, smarter, leaner, quicker, cheaper, all of these types of things, is there something in it for me? At the beginning, it was around recognition, and I'm going to keep banging the drum. Now it's a lot more about growth. That's what's causing people to remain with their organizations, because actually, surprise, surprise, human beings and employees are incredibly resilient when it comes to dealing with difficult times. But if you're not helping them then to align to the future, to Karen's point, to stop them leaving, and giving them that sense of how can I be part of this and how am I going to get the skills, soft or otherwise, to be part of it, then you're not going to retain them.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that that last point then, remaining with organisations and aligning with the future, and a lot of that then comes down to commitment and purpose and believing in that. Karen, if I may start with you, where do you see that commitment trend, and how do you see commitment and that sense of commitment and buy-in to purpose as key to the cultural imperatives that companies need to be navigating going forward?
Yeah, I think we've got early data, and we're certainly seeing innovation rocketing up and commitment looking like it's tailing off. But there's a caveat with that, because we're only this is from Q1, this year, and it's kind of back to the point. Dan talked about deeply held beliefs and assumptions. We commit to something that we see value in. So how do we reconnect that value? If I'm being asked to do endless virtual Zoom meetings, and nobody's really stopping and saying, okay, who are we disconnected from? Where are we interdependent? How do we best use that time together to sort out those problems in our interdependencies? I think we can start to have bad old habits around Zoom and virtual meetings, just as we had on our day-to-day. Meetings were never that great in my experience. We have never sorted out the purpose of having a really good meeting. How many people turn up and say, well, I'm not sure I'm here. And my first response is, well, why are you? And I think, how do we take a moment? We're so busy sometimes. How do we really decide where are we disconnected and with whom, and how do we really want to reconnect? Because we do need to connect more. I think there's a myth right now that introverts are loving it because they're at home in their offices and nobody's bothering them, and extroverts are going crazy because they're not having the daily contact that they had, and that may not be true. So it is about driving down to that deeper level of belief. What are we all believing and assuming to be true about, our priorities or what we need to do most? How do teams connect and meet up at the beginning of the week to say, what's the most crucial thing that we can all support each other with this week? Yeah. I think it's that focus, it's that clarity, and it's maybe challenging some of the bad old habits that we need to reinvent.
Absolutely, Karen. Dan, I'd like to come to you in a moment on that. But as with last week, on the same topic of commitment, but as with last week, we talked about productivity, and we ran a poll last week where over 50% of you stated that you thought that we'd actually become more productive over lockdown. I'd just like to try and build on that and see what everyone here thinks about commitment and how commitment has changed over lockdown, just in line with some of what you were saying there, Karen. If you look in the chat now, hopefully you will see a link just posted from my team to a Menti poll. And that Menti poll will just ask you, how do you think the level of employee commitment to your company has changed over the last 12 months? And you'll see three very simple questions. Has it increased, stayed the same, decreased? It'll take you 10 seconds. The response is absolutely anonymous. Just while you're doing that, I'm navigating that. Dan, if I can come back to you on this point as well. Just around commitment, has the employee employer equilibrium shifted, and employers now need to do more to build that commitment amongst their employees?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that your flock looks at from a data point. I imagine Glint does as well, and does a very brilliant job of it. Listening to what Steve's saying, I just think it's an awesome company. Fair play to you. Yeah, from just anecdotally and some of the stuff I do with the future of work, things I do, from a media point of view, we know that employment engagement is down. It's one of the things that is down. I think employment engagement being down will affect commitment, I would imagine. But we also know that more people are thinking about leaving the job. I can't give you a clear indication of lack of commitment if you're actively looking for a different role. That's not being silly about it. And we do know, again, 8 out of 10 of us leave because of a lack of leadership, because of bad management or bad bosses. We don't leave the company. 34% of people leave companies because they don't like the culture, but actually it's about 75 to 80% of people leave because they didn't like the way they were bossed, or the leadership team. Now, just a quick one on it while you're doing the poll. It'd be interesting to see those results, but we've got to give ourselves a little bit of credit here as well. What we're saying is we've gone through literally a traumatic experience for more than a year, which is, I know we never talk about unprecedented, but it really is. This is, not only do you have the remote work revolution that's happened, where before 2 years ago, 4% of people were remote working, and there were mainly bosses and high net worth independents that were doing it. And now, depending on which polls you look at, about 4% of people want to go back to the office full time. So it's a complete switch. And I think people are missing the fact that revolution will have huge implications for everything, including commitment. Because, of course, if you can work for anyone, almost anywhere, and that is now your belief and understanding, you are going to change your job. Because if you don't like it even a little bit, or if the fact your manager hasn't spoke to you enough and connected with you enough, you're not going to say, oh, well, after COVID, we're not going to say, oh, that's okay, because people won't allow that. They'll just leave to a company with better technology, with better managers, with a better value statement. And maybe that's why, Apple's worth so much money, because, or Google's worth so much money, or, these companies are, because they know the value proposition, and they've got, it's not just employee brand, is it? It's literally what the managers are doing. I'm waffling, of course, because I was waiting for the results to come in there, Paul. I hope
that's good. You filled that time well, Dan. So let's have a look. If my team can show those results. So where have we done? So actually, okay. So employee commitment has increased over the last 12 months. Most of you think. I'm surprised by that. I mean, Stephen, if I can come to you then. So is that what you see in your engagement results as well?
It actually is, and I'm going to be slightly controversial in my response, because last year we saw what can only be described as an unusual climb in the levels of engagement, which kind of peaked in the summer months, so around July, where engagement was a few points higher, or measured engagement was a few points higher than we'd seen at the beginning of the pandemic. The reason I'm saying it's a little bit controversial is because I don't know whether that's because people were happy at work, or whether they were saying they were happy because they were afraid of, losing their jobs. They were seeing, the pandemic not ending as quickly as we've been led to believe at the beginning of it. So I think there was that sort of artificial uptick, and we've seen it declining ever since. But the reason I say it's up and it's increased is because those levels now, as we sit and talk about them, are still above what they were at the beginning of the pandemic, so a few percentage points above. So the short answer is that it's fairly consistent. But I'll give a short answer to that one, because there's more I want to say on some other topics later on.
No, absolutely. Okay, no, thank you. So, I mean, link to commitment and link to building that. So often companies talk about core values, and Dan, you referred to them before. It's deeper than beanbags and football tables. When we look at core values, they can be so fundamental to how companies appear and how they drive employee engagement. Now, just to move the conversation onto core values, I'd just like to bring in a perspective from one of our own consultants here, Lauren Gomersall. And part of the reason for that is that Lauren joined us last year during lockdown, and so hasn't seen, if you like, the bricks and mortar culture. And so I just wanted to start off a little deep dive into core values, just with Lauren's perspective on that and how important core values can be and how we can show them. Lauren?
Thanks, Paul. It's lovely to be back. Good morning, everyone. So, yeah, as Paul mentioned, I'm just going to say something on corporate core values as somebody who joined during the pandemic. And although I'm sat in the office right now, we are doing the full social distancing. I'm here because of Wi-Fi problems. But I've put together this little slide. So we've got the perfect storm that at Protiviti we like to talk about quite often. And one of our pillars of the perfect storm is ever evolving business models. And I think we've seen for a while corporate values and core values integrating their way into a company's business model as a way to help tie together the corporate strategy and mission with their employees' sense of purpose and values. So on this slide, we've got a few examples of different core values from, big companies that we've all heard the names of, Apple, Google, Facebook, John Lewis. So some of them are quite self-explanatory, like give more than you take. Some are a bit more up for interpretation, like environment. And then I found this quote in Forbes that says, when people feel like they belong at work, they are more productive, motivated, engaged, and 3.5 times more likely to contribute to their fullest potential. So as someone who's onboarded in a virtual environment, I think that the core values has helped me within Protiviti to feel that sense of belonging for two main reasons when I thought about it. The first one is that it's given me a shared language to talk with my colleagues about how I feel about certain issues and to really see within the company the things that are important to me that matter to them. And it also gives some business accountability for behaviour, the way the business operates and the way that the employees operate within our firm. So just off that, I would like to ask Karen a question, if I can, around how should companies look to establish their core values in a way that isn't necessarily wishy-washy and does have some purpose, and then how do they live up to them?
Well, if it's wishy-washy, don't even start would be my first answer. I think core values for us, it's probably the most sensitive part of our model, and I always look there first, I have to say. And the question I particularly look at is, if people do have core values, there's a statement that says, do we hold people to account when they don't live up to them? So often I see people do have core values, but nobody's held accountable for them. For me, core values are not just words. You can have gorgeous words on the wall, but the real challenge is to say, okay, Lencioni did a wonderful paper on core values. If you want to look that up, there's what's the absolute must-dos, what's the espoused values, what's the aspirational values. Be clear what type of values you're talking about, because core values really shouldn't be negotiable. They are set, they are set at the top, and they are saying this is what our company is about. If you don't connect to them, then maybe this isn't the best place for you to be. But then really the effort is really saying, okay, what does that mean in terms of behaviour? I've just worked with a company and we've said, okay, what can everybody expect from a leader in relation to these values, and what can the company expect from everybody in this company in relation to those values? And they have to be defined. It's not to become a checklist, but it should be pretty easy. For me, we have succeeded in implementing those core values if a senior leader, anybody in the senior leadership team, can be challenged by anybody in the company to say, I thought we weren't going to do that. And they say, thank you very much. That's really powerful feedback. Thank you for highlighting that I'm not living them. So they have to be understood. They have to be integrated into HR processes. They have to be in every meeting room. Meetings should be reflected on whether we've lived them in this particular meeting. Core values are guiding principles that should drive your decisions. They are part of your brand. Every employee has to experience them before I think any external customer is expected to.
Thank you, Karen. I think the second difficult question from Victoria here, and maybe I'll take this to you again, Stephen. Team values, do team values and so-called corporate values, and those ones that Karen's just talked about, have to be the same?
How can I attack this one? There's a difficulty when you ask employees about their team, and the difficulty is that when the responses are very, very similar to if you ask people, are you a good driver, or are you a good mother or father? Invariably they say, we got it, we've nailed it in our team. Our culture is absolutely tip top. We collaborate, we're practicing what we preach, we're demonstrating the behaviors that the organization wants us to. And then you ask the team next to them what they think about your team, and they've got a very, very different view. So that's a real risk of measuring it from the team up. So I would rather start with what the organization is about. What do we want to achieve? Who are we as a business? Design the cultural imperatives and values around that, and then make sure that they're trickling down and demonstrated by leaders and practiced by leaders. So a very, very good example of that is diversity and inclusion, which is obviously something which a lot of people are finally beginning to twig that is an important thing that they do in their organization. I'm still seeing organizations time and time again with all those wonderful hashtags and all these wonderful marketing pieces of information they're putting out, all being pumped out by a group of middle-aged white men. So until those things are actually being put into practice, not just in terms of words, but in terms of actions, how on earth can you expect that to trickle down to the team level? How can you expect hiring managers in businesses to start reflecting the communities that they operate in if their own communities aren't reflective of those in itself? Got quite wound up about that just then, but it's something I care very, very strongly about.
And Dan, I know you do too. And I think let's hear your perspective on that as well. I mean, it's interesting, even having that poll, someone reflected in the chat that had we had a more diverse crowd here, whether that level of employee engagement would have actually have been showing is increased. But what's for you typically around, is today's board sufficiently diverse to be plugged into the changing cultural needs of the employees?
Well, I think deep down, certainly with my kind of your flock hat on, with my diversity and lead stuff for the Manchester Publicity Association, we all know the answer is no. And we know, especially in things like technology, which is particularly terrifying, that the answer is no. The gender imbalance is quite pronounced, certainly on board level. And I'm not going to bore you with the VC funding problem that plagues the world. And of course, it's a massive thing to try to think about. From a diversity point of view, it's really important, though, isn't it, that we don't just hashtag it and pretend we do. At Your Flock, we hired people based on a diversity standard that we brought in. So we didn't hire anyone until we wanted to, 50% of our investors are women. 60% of our workforce, which is tiny, are people of colour. But that's because we didn't hire anyone until we got the right candidates to do so, because we felt so strongly about it. And it is to do with the fact that diversity creates better tech products. So I know we're kind of at the thin edge of the wedge, but it's really important that we do get diversity and inclusion. It's the big idea. It's going to make a huge difference. Also, I think I've got to be really careful words here, but if you look at the work done by Bruce Daisley, ex-chap from Twitter, the boss of Twitter in the UK and Europe, it's a very famous chap and brilliant, doing a talk with him next week, future work. Anyway, piece of research they've just done in Australia, and Australia is obviously ahead of us a bit in this whole going back to the office. The piece of work they did is, if you want to get people back into the office, they have proven data-wise, it's usually to do with a lack of diversity on your board and in your employees. So if you aren't very diverse and your board isn't very diverse, you are clamoring to get back into the office. So you're almost signaling by that move, because you're not allowed, because you think, well, and I'm not being rude about it, but that is just what the data is showing. And I think deep down, if we all start nodding our heads, we most probably know that to be true, but now the data's proved it as well. So we've got to be really careful in this remote work revolution, that if we start getting people and forcing them back to the office, we might lose some of our best talent, especially from diverse places. But also, remote work allows us to start doing things in diversity and inclusion, which we wouldn't have been able to do before, because it means you can do flexible work and employing mums that are coming back to work, employing more women, employing more black people, and not just because it's the right thing to do for society, but it's the right thing to do for your business. But of course I would bang the drum quite a lot, because I am quite, I'm quite brown. So I'm also quite old. So age is a really key one as well. So let's not forget that diversity is neurodiversity and all these other things. Age is a huge one, by the way. And I think that's one of the things we don't talk about. And it did make me smile before we were talking about, you know, if we had a slightly different people on the poll, of course it would affect what that level would be. Same thing again with, you know, people wanting to come back to the office. If you look at the folk who don't want to come back to the office, they tend to be of a certain different age to some of the people that do need to come back to the office. Some people need to come back to the office because they don't have wonderful homes and places they can actually do all this stuff that I'm very lucky enough to be able to do. So we've got to really kind of put our arms around the next generation of talent, because actually they might want to come back to work. And believe me, they don't want to come back to the work all the time and into the office all the time. And we have been working all the time. So we've got to be careful. We've got to ask more questions of the young people, I believe, because we could miss out.
Absolutely, Dan. No, absolutely. Thank you for that. So look, I'm going to be bold here and open this to the floor. There's so much chat going through and it's wonderful. I can't quite keep up with it, but there's loads of great questions there. Who has a question for Dan, Karen, or Stephen? This is when all the cameras turn off. If not, I'll keep going.
Well, can I ask then, because I've mentioned about unconscious. What can we do about unconscious bias? I mean, Dan's just mentioned about colour and age, and particularly for me, you know, a woman, certain age, and the whole thing about, dare I say it in this, you know, being a northerner, all sorts of aspects. I've been trying to take on some people who need some internships, and the accents that people speak with, all sorts of things like that. So what are people doing as employers and to actually fight this?
I can do a quick response on that. Certainly from what I've seen within Glint and LinkedIn, which is our parent company, is a huge movement towards allyship. So as an employee who clearly is not in a diversity group, at least from the outside, is that I'm educated. I think I've got it nailed, like I described other people. But the reality is I don't understand what it's like to be a person of color, or somebody who's returning from maternity or paternity leave, or somebody who's returning from a period of incarceration, all of these things. You know, let's not forget there are a broad range of reasons that people may be impacted in the workplace. So taking part in discussion groups, taking part in groups which basically allow me to hear from people in those communities that I may not be interacting with as much as I should be, admitting that you know, the first sort of stage to recovery is admitting you have a problem, and really trying to kind of put and basically form a sense of allyship, not for the sake of just kind of going overboard and doing all these token gestures, but actually truly understanding what it means to be part of those groups.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that's a wonderful articulation of allyship. I think that's really, really powerful. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Or Dan, Karen, want to come back? Also, I can't see a hand up, so I just can't see whose hand it is.
I just wanted to comment that we're helping for organizations that really want to have they're looking at their culture, but they particularly want to think about diversity, equity and inclusion. We have designed a module. We can help them segment the data to really begin to look at who's experiencing what where. Yep. Is it level, is it function, is it business unit, to really kind of exactly what Stephen's saying. How do you begin to have a very focused conversation and discussion and set some priorities for change from an kind of inclusive standpoint? So, you know, I think there are those support mechanisms out there to really help focus those discussions and to feed back to the board and leaders and really begin to understand where are the synergies, where are the discrepancies, and what do we need to do about it.
Thank you, Karen.
And certainly if you start recruiting on values and value-based stuff, which is what Your Flock does. So we found that the people that use Your Flock at the moment are much higher in their diversity recruitment proposition than those that aren't. And that's been a lovely kind of byproduct of kind of looking at your values and looking at that and then hiring based on that, not based on the other stuff. I'm a great believer. I was talking on Radio 5 a bit ago about bringing in blind recruitment, and obviously not blind people, but the point being, you know, it being a blind process and taking pretty much everything off CVs. And I can remember a year ago and everyone thinking I was mad. I have a feeling that might become a lot more a good way of doing things because of the very problems of unconscious bias. And please, really important one though, don't let an AI system, do this. And we're letting AI systems that are inherently racist and sexist, by the way, and they are because of the data sets. Believe me, someone in tech, I know this to be true. You cannot let an AI system do it at the moment. A, because they have the intelligence of about 6-year-old, and B, because they are a vicious circle of creating a problem for you later on because of the data set they were based on. And 80% of the people that made those things were white middle-aged men. So you've got to be really careful just abrogating responsibility to a machine at the moment. Please, anyone on the call that thinks their ATS and other systems are using AI and you think that's a clever, go for silver bullet, it's the opposite. You're going to create a worse, a non-diverse culture. Sorry, Paul, I went on a bit of a rant there.
No, thank you.
Massively important.
Jason, we've got time for one more question. You've got your hand up.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Just echoing what Dan was saying regarding AI. Great article in The Economist week before last, exactly endorsing that, and just the fact that it's almost amplifying the biases that we are seeing that the humans are feeding into that. So there's that point there. One point we've been working in Lancashire with high performing businesses. We've seen that the new leader, as I will describe them, has a very different set of DNA, if you will, than the old grey men who went before. And what we are seeing is the highest performing ones are those who've often had adverse childhood experiences, adverse adult experiences, diversity issues or otherwise, and is incredibly more resilient, but also recruiting in that image too. But it's statistically significant that they are thriving from a performance point, from a turnover point, and from other elements by facing into that. And I just wondered if the rest of you are seeing that hard evidence is that leading pack looks different, thank goodness, and feels different, is making a difference. But equally, they're widening the gene pool for those who can come up with them. So the opportunity is not just restricted to that echo chamber previously, but actually to all.
Yeah. No, Jason, thank you so much for that. I've got an eye on the time, and it feels like we could keep going for quite a while yet with all these. But look, I'm gonna come quickly back to our guests, Stephen, Dan, and Karen. Just ask them for some closing comments at 3 minutes to 9, because what I'd just like you to, and I'll come to yourself first of all, Stephen, if I may. But what words of advice would you have for everyone here? How best do they mobilise the necessary cultural change as we trickle back to the office?
So I can give you 6 things because these are validated from recent work and work before the pandemic that you can be focusing on. First of all, well-being. People need to feel physically and psychologically safe at work. They need to feel valued. They need to be treated with respect. They need to feel a sense of empowerment, so having a sense of control over what the future of work looks like. So not just saying, here's what you've experienced and here's what the future is, what do you think? Giving them a say in what that looks like. Helping them focus on what's happening day to day, giving them a sense of growth. I referred to that earlier on, helping them engage with the organization as a learning being, if I can put it like that. Giving them that sense, retaining that sense of connection where it's been eroded. And finally, and this really ties it together nicely with the whole culture point, give them a sense of purpose on a personal level and an organizational level. They would be my 6 people success elements for success.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And I think if my team could just post those in the chat, that'll be wonderful so people can see them. Dan, if I could come to you, sir, just for some closing comments. What do you want people here to do to take away and mobilise the change?
Thank goodness, I was literally just scribbling down. Thanks for the team. If I can take those down for me, great. Key one is going to be data driven. You cannot be hiring on a hunch anymore. You've got to be data driven as the modern manager going post pandemic. You've got to tie things much heavily into values and that value proposition. It's going to be, if you don't know people well enough, that they will leave, and if you're not empowering them enough, echoing what Stephen was saying, and a key one there is literally use technology to do it, but do not rely on technology. Brilliant bit of digital transformation piece, which is you should spend about 3 times more on the resources, the human resources side of it, the staff side of it, than you do on the technology. So don't just buy tech like Your Flock and other things and go, oh, we've got this sorted. Because that's just the start of the journey. That is the feedback loop. And I'll hand over to Karen now because I'm sensing my minute was done.
Thank you, Dan.
I would say absolutely know your culture, be able to diagnose it, discuss it, create psychologically safe spaces to discuss that and really prioritize which bits of that culture are enabling you to meet your challenges, which bits are inhibiting that process. lead by example, keep it human, and it's absolutely okay to be vulnerable, and let's give people permission to share their vulnerabilities with an intention of caring for each other and taking the learning. You know, I think that whole reflect, what have we learned? What are the good old habits that we want to preserve and strengthen? What are the bad old habits that we can let go and leave behind?
Wonderful. Karen, you brought us home there, so thank you ever so much. You can see the 6 points in the chat. You can also see in the chat a demand for skill talent report posted. Please have a look at that as well, because I think that links to so much that we've discussed today. Look, it's been wonderful. As I said, I think we could keep going here for a very long time. But Karen, Dan, Stephen, and Lauren, thank you so much. That was a fantastic discussion. Thank you to all of you as well for contributing so much. And I hear that I can see that some of you are connecting, and that's exactly what this forum is about. There'll be a video of this posted on our website as well as on the internet as well. We'll give you links to that. Please share with your colleagues, friends, LinkedIn contacts. Next week, we'll be looking at the future of healthcare and what that means for us all. So until next week, look, I'd really like to say thank you so much to Karen, Dan, and Stephen again. It's been a wonderful discussion. Extend my best wishes to you all. Stay safe, be bold, be kind to each other, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks very much,
Paul.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Lauren.
Bye.
Fantastic.
Bye.